And hello once again, internet people. This is LC Lupus, or at least that's the name that I like to use. Today, we're going to be continuing with our lecture series about various concepts, literary and, this is the first sort of non-literary one, although you could still apply it in literary ways, I suppose. But let's just get straight into it. At the end of the video, there'll be all the usual things, and you can check the description at the moment if you want to check out any other stuff. So, let's have a look here. Today, we're looking at becoming, the concept of becoming. Now, I've written here, becoming versus being. Now, we're not really going to be focusing on being, because being is a whole long thing. Mostly, we're going to be focusing just on becoming. But to understand becoming, you kind of need to understand a little bit about being as well. So, being and becoming, right? So, being is essentially something more static. It is what something is. Being, I think, is usually considered to be kind of the central idea behind or within metaphysics, understanding the being of something. So, being is something kind of static. That is what you are. It could be, for instance, your essence, what is inside you, what you actually are, right? Becoming is change. It is the fact that you are changing, or something is changing. It is going through a process of change. So it is dynamic, as I say here. So becoming is dynamic, being is generally considered to be static, so it doesn't change, it doesn't move, it doesn't alter. So becoming, we're going to be talking about this because I think it's a very interesting thing. So we tend to have this idea that people are a certain way. You know, people are a certain way, creatures are a certain way, the world is a certain way. It is that thing, right? I'm sure you've met people who believe that people don't change, that they're one way and they never change. That is sort of a focus on sort of this idea of being, of something being static and unchangeable. I think it's much more interesting to look at becoming, to look at how things can change over time. So, first, let us look at what is this idea of social construction. What is social construction? So a social construct is a sociological term, and it refers to something that is created by people but doesn't necessarily have a physical presence. So, say for instance, a bank is in a building, which is a physical construction. It exists, right? You can touch it. However, what is inside the bank, as in the bank, is not actually touchable. You know, it's a concept. A bank is a concept. It's an idea. It is something that has a purpose that we have decided, which means it could also change. It could alter. The building a bank is in might not be a bank forever. The building is physical, bank is not. The idea of a bank is not. Something else would be something like, say, money. Money is a social construct. Money doesn't really exist in the physical sense of the term. So, you know, food exists. The goods you spend money on exists. Money also, of course, is represented by paper or coins. Right? What you usually think of as money. However, those aren't actually worth that amount. They are representations of that amount. You know, a $50 bill isn't actually worth $50. The paper and what have you is worth probably a couple of cents. It's not actually worth $50. We have just agreed as a society that this particular piece of paper, it's more like a cotton blend of any of this piece of paper, with the number 50 on it, equals $50. We just have agreed that that's the case. You can see this even more in the terms of the fact that actually most money isn't even in paper. Most money is essentially numbers in a bank, right? Most money doesn't exist physically. It is an idea. It is numbers. It is not really physically, tangibly real. We have decided as a society together that money has value. You could say this about all sorts of things. Lots of things are social constructs. This is also why you go into the idea of things like gender being a social construct, which you're going to kind of go into in a bit. So that's what a social construct is. It's not physically real, but we have decided that it is real as a society. So that's why it is a social construct. It is constructed by society, not physically. So that's what a social construct is. So lots of things are social constructs, right? Because it's things that don't tangibly exist. This is why, for instance, we might refer to in sociology things like race and ethnicity as social constructs. The color of someone's skin is a physical thing. However, everything around it is not actually physical. Your culture, your beliefs, etc., those are all ideas that have then been baked into however you were raised. So, yes, the skin color is physical, it is real, but when people talk about the social construction of race, they are not actually referring to actual skin color. They're referring to the idea that humans have essentially created what it means to be white, what it means to be black. These are not actual physical things. The easiest way to see this is if somebody is, say, one ethnicity and is raised by another ethnicity, they do retain their skin color, but their culture will be completely different. So a black child raised by white parents or a white child raised by black parents will culturally be whatever race they were raised as. They could later choose to try to reclaim part of their heritage, but the way that they are raised, they are culturally whatever it happens to be that they were raised. So that is what a social construct is. And that's why when we could talk about the social construction of gender, that's a similar thing, right? This is kind of important to understand the idea of becoming gender. So let's first just talk about this. The idea of sex versus gender and sexuality. So sex is typically considered to be the physical attributes, right? So those are the physical things that make somebody a biological male, biological female, or biologically intersex, or anything sort of in between. So that would be things like the physical presence of primary and secondary sexual characteristics, penis, vagina, breasts, etc. Also things like chromosomes and hormone levels, etc. Those are all sex. Gender, however, is the social construction side of things. That's masculinity and femininity. Nothing about having a penis means masculine. We have just decided that they are related to each other, and so we have sort of decided certain things are gendered. We've decided, a man is someone big and like tough and strong, and someone who's confident and someone who's assertive and dominant. Now, when I say big, strong, those are physical characteristics. So you could say that's in the realm of sex that has been sort of appropriated by gender. But confident, dominant, assertive, these aren't biological characteristics. These are things that are cultural. These are things that have been developed by people over time. They are social constructs. Saying that this group should be this way, this group should be that way, is saying that the social construct should be a certain way. So saying that, say, women should be submissive, men should be dominant, has nothing to do with their penis, their vagina, their stature, nothing at all. That is what you believe the culture says about it. So when we're talking about becoming gendered, now the idea of becoming, right, is changing. So when you are born, there are many, many different arguments, but let's claim at this point that you're kind of a blank slate, for the most part. The idea of nature versus nurture comes into play here. So, when you're born, you could say that you are a blank slate. And then the culture you're born into, so the particular parents you happen to have, in the particular culture you happen to have, the particular language that they happen to teach you, the religion that they happen to have and so teach you, all of these things are nurture. They're not nature. They're not biologically determined. These are things that are completely socially constructed. These are things that you happen to have been taught because they happen to have been taught them and they happen to have been taught them. So take something like religion, right? The only reason that you might have the religion you have is because it's your parents' religion. And they had that religion because it's their parents' religion. And so on and so on. Unless somebody at some point converted. That also obviously can happen. So what happens with this idea of nature versus nurture is that nature is sort of saying things are a certain way, right? You are biologically whatever. Nurture is saying that, listen, you're actually raised into who you become. You're taught, right? You have parents, and your parents teach you a certain way of being, and so you become like that. So, right? So you're in a constant state, essentially, of becoming. You're changing all the time. You're born, sort of a blank slate, and as you grow, you learn. You learn and you learn and you learn, and we might not think of it as learning, but you are constantly learning until you die. You are constantly becoming something. That's why you might, the idea that when you knew someone in high school and then you don't see them for 20 years and you see them again and they've completely changed. They're completely different people. That's because they never stopped growing. People don't stop growing. You are always changing and adapting and changing based on your environment. So, the idea of becoming gendered. When you're born with whatever sexual characteristics you have, right? So you're born with a penis, a vagina, whatever. Okay, fine. You have your sex. Then it comes to your gender. As you grow, you become your gender, right? So when you're first born, say you're born as a biologically male, let's just say. You're taught certain things as you grow. So when you're first a little baby, you're allowed to cry. And babies cry, that's what they do. As you get older and older and older, you get told, boys do not cry. Over time, you start to believe this. You believe that men are not supposed to cry. And so you develop this non-crying, sort of emotionally stunted way of existing. You are becoming masculine, or at least what society deems to be masculine, right? Because it can change. Different cultures have different ideas of what is masculine and what is feminine. But you become that. You're not born that. You become gendered over time. And this is also why, for instance, people who are transgender people will be generally born and raised into a certain gender, and they realize that this gender does not fit who they see themselves as, who they see themselves inside as. And so they might, if they decide to, seek to become the other gender. They are wanting to change, to become something different. Now the thing is, you're always changing, right? A lot of, say for instance, modern men, because masculinity is, there's a lot of toxic things that can be in masculinity. When some people don't understand the term toxic masculinity does not mean all masculinity is toxic. It means that certain traits, when sort of left to just fester, can become very toxic. So let's say, for instance, it might be a good thing to not allow yourself to become emotionally vulnerable very easily, right? That's like a good thing to have, because say if something bad happens, you'll be able to keep yourself controlled. That might be good. Cool. That's considered like a masculine trait. What happens though is that people who consider themselves to be masculine don't allow themselves really any emotions other than anger. They're not allowed to be sad. They're not allowed to show vulnerability, right? They're not allowed to. That's a no-no. They've been taught. They've become what society deems to be masculine. Now you can decide your own becoming, because you're always becoming something. So let's move on to the next one. So that's like gendered, right? Next one I said here is becoming educated. Now by educated, I do not actually mean, say, going to university, whatever. I personally consider there to be a big distinction between school and education. Education is always a good thing, to me. School, I'm not a big fan of schools. I think schools have a lot of problems in them. And when I say schools, I also mean universities and stuff. Universities have a lot of problems in them. They're often, not always, but they're usually businesses, which means that they're trying to make money, which means they're trying to turn over as many people as possible. They're trying to get in as many students as possible and churn them out with degrees. that is a business incentive. That is a bad thing. But education itself is learning, and learning is a good thing. Now, over time, you're always becoming more and more educated. Now, you might not see it that way. You might not see it as being educated, say, if you keep up with current events. You might not see that as becoming educated, but you are becoming more and more educated about that particular thing. So you are becoming educated. When you start out your life as a baby, you can't even speak. You don't know anything at all. All you know how to do is cry. That's your entire thing. You cry, you eat, you pee, and you poo. That's what you do. That didn't mean to rhyme. So that's what you do. That's all you're capable of doing. I'm angry. Well, not necessarily angry, but I'm crying now. I want something, and I don't want something, so I'm not crying. That's like nothing. So you're ignorant. You don't know anything. You're dumb when you're a baby. And then what happens is you develop. You learn language. You learn society. You start to learn these things, and you become, over time, someone different. You become someone who knows more. When we talk about how old people are wise, it's not necessarily because they have 8 degrees. It's because they're older. They're more experienced. They have become educated over time. But now the thing is, you never stop becoming educated, right? Even when you're 100 years old, the world still changes, which means that you change with it. Or you become very, very old and you can't really keep up anymore. And that happens. But that's still becoming. You are still becoming something. You still have to respond to the world throughout your entire life. So you become educated over time. Next one I'm talking here is becoming human. Now, becoming human is one that will probably be a bit more contentious, because there's this idea that when you're born, you are a human. But I like the idea that when you're kind of born, you're a bit of a blank slate. And then as you enter into society, you become more and more of a person within society. You become, because a human isn't just a bipedal primate that doesn't really have much hair, that has lost most of its sort of prognathous jaw. That's not, like, yes, sure, biologically that's what a human is. But when you look at someone who's a feral child, now feral children are a phenomenon there's not many cases of it, but a feral child is someone who, as a child, was either suffered extreme neglect or they were raised by an animal. Now, there are a few cases of this happening. There are 2 very, very famous fictional examples where the characters are perfectly fine as they grow up, which is not usually what happens. But the most famous fictional examples are Tarzan and Mowgli, right? The Jungle Book and Tarzan. They are feral humans. They're feral animals. They're feral people, feral children that become adults, and they're still essentially raised by animals, etc. What you'll often see in those stories, though, is that they end up joining human society, always. But anyway, there are a few cases of feral children. And the thing is, they're not really humans when they're feral children, because they're not raised by people, so they often cannot speak. They don't know any customs. They don't know any of these kind of things. And a lot of them kind of die young because they face permanent, when they are eventually saved, they face permanent sort of mental issues because they missed out on developmental sectors of early childhood development. They lost those things. So they never really get to become human in the sense of more socially. Biologically, they are human. But what happens is, like, think of how we talk about certain people. So feral children is one thing. But what about people who are, that we like to deem monsters? Serial killers, like mass murderers, genocidal dictators, right? So look at your Jeffrey Dahmers and your name whatever American mass shooter is this week, and like a Hitler, right? We tend to like to use words like monster to describe them when they are actually human. They're human. But we like to use the term monster because it distances ourselves from them. We can say, no, they're not humans. They've clearly done something wrong. They don't know how to live in society, but they're not humans. Move on from them. Now that's it kind of cowardice, hiding from the fact that they are still people, they're humans, they're not actually monsters. But we have this idea that you are a human, which is special. Being a human is special, and you are becoming human over time. And becoming human means knowing that, for instance, you probably shouldn't kill and eat people. Probably, you probably shouldn't go into a school and kill a bunch of children. That's not what a human would do. And you also, you shouldn't do genocide. That's not humane. That's not humane. That's not what a human would do. So the idea of becoming human, you're constantly, supposedly, becoming someone that is able to live in a human society. Now this eventually comes to the question, are you ever complete? If you're always in a state of becoming, are you ever actually a person? Right? A person is usually seen as something that has being, it is stable, right? But if you're constantly changing, are you ever done? Are you ever complete? Not necessarily. It's an interesting idea. Maybe the only time in which you as a human being are complete, when you stopped becoming, is the moment of your death. Maybe. Because, then you no longer are becoming anything. Unless, of course, the afterlife exists, in which case you keep becoming, and you'll never actually be anything. You will only ever become over time. That's pretty much becoming. Now, the last little thing here is I put here Deleuze and Guattari, because some people who know becoming will want to bring up Deleuze and Guattari. I'm not the biggest fan of them. They are two thinkers who wrote in as complicated a way as possible, so that basically their work means nothing. You could disagree, but you can kind of read anything into their work that you want. So they had a whole section called Becoming Animal in their book 1,000 Plateaus. Now, that is sort of about the changing of the human into something other. Now, I'm not really going to go into that because, to be perfectly honest, I struggle to understand it because it's often incomprehensible. That's just me, And it's also quite funny that when I was doing the research for my master's degree, I read Deleuze and Guattari's two famous books, and I had to watch a whole bunch of videos, YouTube videos, to understand what they were talking about. And you know how pretty much all of those videos start? They all start out with being, now I think I understand what they're talking, which means that nobody really knows. Maybe they didn't even know, but Deleuze and Guattari, if you're interested, you can look at other videos about them because I think that they're overrated and incomprehensible a lot of the time. But they do go into the idea of becoming, especially becoming animal, becoming molecular, becoming cosmic. There's a couple of becomings that they talk about. But I'm not going to talk about those because I think I would do it a disservice. And people who do want to find out, go check out other people who do talk about Deleuze and Guattari. Alright, so that is becoming. That's my little rant about becoming. I hope that it was helpful. So this has been LC Lupus. You can check out all the things in the description. You can do the usual things like comment, subscribe, share. You can follow me on Twitter and the other places. Or if you are interested in supporting the stuff I do, you can also check out my books. There are 2 of them out so far. I'm going to put them over here. The one is called The Cyborg Wilderness, which is a story about a lone cyborg wandering the wastes, trying to figure out what happened and to try to find some kind of meaning in life now that everything has been destroyed. It's a very happy story, obviously. It is also written in an intentionally stunted style. No commas, no apostrophes, only full stops, generally simple and compound sentences, not really any complex sentences. So it's a very weird stunted style. So that's Cyborg Wilderness. Then also Mostly Rejected, which is a short story collection with a bunch of things in it, some of them fun. And it's called that because most of them were rejected by literary journals. So I thought it'd be funny to call it Mostly Rejected to mask my deep, deep sadness. And yes, that is everything. So you could check those out. We could do the other usual things. And that will be everything from me. So I have been LC Lupus, and I hope that you have a great day, week, and month ahead. And goodbye.